Nice and quiet, listen. I love that sound. Yeah, yeah. That's the last sound a bad warrior would hear on the battlefield, eh? Yeah. Pretty cool. So, what have I got going on today? Well, I got a bunch of videos I want to make today. This one, I'm going to start with David Suzuki. Yeah, years ago when I was a kid, I saw David Suzuki live. And, you know, it was pretty cool. The school sponsored him to come and speak there, and he came and he spoke, and he had his, you know, it was a pretty, I got to admit, I enjoyed it, you know. Even, you know, as much as I remember of it, or as little as I remember of it, I do remember one of the little experiments he showed us, and that was it. And it was kind of neat. It was it was pretty good. And I had a fairly decent opinion of David Suzuki at the time. I thought, you know, I used to watch the nature of things growing up and all that, and I thought, okay, well, some of it, yeah, it's really left-wing propaganda. Other stuff, okay, yeah, the man does make a point. I mean, love him or hate him, so to speak, you know, he is kind of one of those people that is, you know, the flies found me, you know, very opinionated, number one, and you got to watch where he gets his source of, you know, his studies, David Suzuki Foundation, all that, where they get their studies and who funds it. That's the big one. But for the most part, I think a lot of the stuff he talks about is fairly neutral. I know this sounds really bizarre, me being as right-wing as I am, actually almost sounding like I'm sticking up for David Suzuki. I'm not. You know, I mean, don't get me wrong. He's a radical. But there is a lot of things that, you know, most of us can agree on, or agree to disagree, or whatever. But a lot that we can agree on for the environment. That, you know, we need to have a more sustainable environment and stuff like that. Now, where I totally disagree on him is how to go about it. Now, of course, Ezra Levant and David Suzuki, I'm pretty sure they're best friends. Not. Now, it doesn't matter which one of these guys you like or dislike. That's not what this is about. This is just about another one of David Suzuki's kind of bizarre statements. Again, maybe you'll disagree with it, maybe you'll agree with it. But according to David Suzuki, he thinks the door for immigration should be closed here in Canada. I agree with him. Not because we're full. Now, hear me out on this. I don't agree with that, a permanent closure of the doors to Canada for immigration, but at least for, wow, that's hot in here, till we figure out what we have. Jason Kenney, who I think is actually not a bad immigration minister, for the most part. He has toughened it up a step in the right direction. Problem is where he loses me is that he's just bringing in way, way, way too many people at a time. Now, where I agree with David Suzuki is on the idea of closing the doors temporarily, but David Suzuki wants to do it permanently. Now, the funny part about that is David Suzuki only wants to open the doors for what you would call refugees, you know, immigrants that, you know, from war-torn countries and stuff like that. That's totally opposite of me, because it's something I picked up on when I was a kid. If you take refugee A and refugee B that have been fighting each other forever and a day, and their families, tribes have been fighting each other, and it is all tribes fighting over there somewhere. Anything that's in the news, you know what I mean? And, you know, they come here. What, they're going to forget all atrocities back there? No, they're going to eventually, if you bring in, if you have cultural displacement, you will get that problem in your country. Usually they take forms as gangs, but, you know, it could get worse than that. So that's where I disagree with David Suzuki on that, where, you know, don't just bring in, you bring in some, and what we should do, and I don't think we do it yet, is that if somebody comes here claiming refugee status, they should be at the back of the line. You know, I don't care what you come in here for, whether it's economic immigrant or whatever, but you should be put in your proper queue in the line. Just because you came here fleeing persecution doesn't mean you're any more special, you know what I mean? Because there are people that are trying to come through the front door that just can't, and this is why we need to close the door. Again, process those who've been waiting, some people up to 20 years, you know what I mean? Like, shame on us, you know, that's not fair. But I say this in every country, we need to close our doors, figure out what we got, figure out what we need, process the backlog. Once you've processed the backlog, then assess how much more do you need. The problem is now, because the the idea, like 250,000 people a year is just way too many. It's the lowest number out of any of the political parties, but they're actually bringing in more people than what the Conservatives are bringing in, more people than what the Liberals are. And the economic immigrants that we're bringing in, well, it's a good thing, but it's not a good thing. The process is good. The problem is there's, again, that little banker thing where, it's being set up in such a way that, like outsourcing destroyed many companies in the 90s, well, insourcing is the new outsourcing, where it's kind of like the bail-in, bail-out for the banks. What they're going to do now is labor, they can't compete with the labor over there in China. And fuel costs are getting too high, so what you need to do is import the labor, meaning temporary visas, and pay immigrants 15% less than the regular citizens of Canada. I disagree with this. In fact, anybody that comes here on a work permit or whatever should be paid 15% more minimum. Why? Because, again, if they want to send money home to their families, it makes it easier for them. But more, and only give these people the jobs if there is simply nobody to take the job here. Now, you can't force people to work, but you can cut off their benefits if they don't work. Yes, I'm one of those people. I do believe in welfare reform. No, you do not need to insource labor for Tim Hortons and service industry jobs. There's enough people on welfare that could do that. Most people on welfare are able-bodied. I believe we need a welfare system because people do lose their jobs. It's unpredictable. I've always been kind of a bit of a freelance guy, so I know how unpredictable work can be, and I do agree. But there's some people that just, they abuse it. So you need to be able to say, well, if you can't find a job, we'll give you 6 months, and after that, we'll tell you what you're going to do. And then if you don't like that, well, then we're going to cut your benefits. You have to be able to tell people no. You have to let people fail. And, that's how it has to be. Getting back to the immigration, I don't agree with David Suzuki because, close the doors forever. Land mass wise, the argument was, well, Canada's the second largest land mass in the world, country in the world. True, but infrastructure wise, we're tiny. If you really, really, Italy, 60 million people. What's the size of Italy? My thumb? Okay. Canada, 33.5. We're like half of that. And I've talked to, remember an old Italian immigrant that I talked to, and he came to Canada, he says, it would take me 3 hours to drive through 6 or 7 countries. He says, I get to Canada, and he says, I drive up for 2 days, and all I see is the trees. He says, it's too big. He says, I got lost, it was too big. It was funny the way he said it. He was like really Italian. He was like, yeah, I used to, I drive for 2 days, I see trees. Yeah, that was a funny conversation. Yeah, to me, it's like, everything, from Canada, everything's kind of like large scale anyway, and you're just used to large scale and spread out. You're not used to compact. But getting back to the immigration thing, close the doors, see what we got, and do it that way. But the way we are doing it now, again, I like a lot of the things we're doing. We are restricting it up, but I don't like the idea that it's insourcing labor that undercuts the people here, because it just makes everybody equally poor, and that is a part of the Agenda 21 thing. Although I do think Minister Kennedy is a good minister for the most part. Again, not everybody. It's just, this dot doesn't know what the other dot's doing, that type of thing. And even sometimes if they do, it's an accumulation of this, getting. But the bottom line is the wealth is being taken from the people by underscored labor of people who would, work for next to nothing just to get out of the shitholes that they're living in. Sorry for the language. So close the doors until we take care of the backlogs. I used to work with a Cuban guy named Marino, and he waited quite a few years to become a citizen. And I remember him saying, because we both worked a shitty job, again, sorry for the language. And he was like, he would go for, it'd take him like 2 years to get a meeting with the, the immigration officer or whatever, in charge of his case file. So here he is with his wife, and they just had a kid or whatever, and they want to live in Canada from Cuba. He's mopping floors right beside me, and he's working hard, and he's doing everything, but he can't advance. He can't get anywhere because of his status. So basically, underemployment, right? So he goes, I remember the night before he went, and he comes back the next day, and you can see it on his face, it didn't go well, but I asked anyway. I said, so how did it go? He goes, some immigrants came here, claimed refugee status, and we got, were put off for another 6-8 months or whatever. And this can go on for years and years and years. And he goes, it's so unfair. He says, I come in through the front door, and he barely spoke English. This man really worked hard to become a citizen. I met him ran into him a couple of years after, spoke almost perfect English. He integrated because he had no choice but to integrate with the people. And integration, that's one thing I do like about Minister Kennedy, talking about making sure people integrate. So our level of immigration is probably better than most countries because it's not just an open door policy, but we're just bringing in too many people too fast. We're going to get cultural displacement like they have in Europe. So there I agree with David Suzuki on that. Especially in these tough economic times, because as soon as it goes awry on everybody, of course, the immigrants are going to suffer first, but they're also the ones that are probably less healthy. Where from their, most people are fleeing countries where they don't have good health care and stuff like that. They're going to get here, and of course, what's going to happen is it'll just strain our system worse than what it is, kind of like what's happening in Europe. So, yeah, so I agree with most of the things going on. The other thing I disagree with is anchor babies. I say whatever the status is of the adult, the parent, that's what the status of the child should be. So I would say give them a little bit of when they turn 18, if they were born in Canada, not automatic citizenship, but when they turn 18, then okay, they can apply and maybe get jumped to the head of well, depending on, how they if they move back to the old country and they come here and they can't integrate easily, well, then I'd put them near the back line. But I would give them first kick at the can just because they were born here. But I wouldn't give them instant citizenship. I think that's a ridiculous idea. You can't do that. Again, it strains our system. So it sounds heartless, but I mean, again, it's that same scenario I use all the time. There's a 12-man lifeboat and 30 people in the water. Sorry, you're going to have to let some drown, you know what I mean? Or the boat sinks, right? As bad as that sounds, that's just reality. That's why you have to it's not about being mean, it's just, that's what it is. So this idea of open door immigration, the NDP, if they most likely are going to probably win the next election, I just have a gut feeling on that, and if they do, they're going to bring in 500,000 people a year. Right now, we're bringing in 250,000 people. They're going to double it, again, for political correctness. Plus, it's like what Obama's doing with the Mexicans. I'm going to get a new base, and, it's just going to lead to cultural displacement. It's too fast, too soon, and nobody wins in the end. The Liberals, they would bring in 400,000. But however, when they're on their kick at the can, for 12 years under Christie, they didn't bring in as many as, right now we're bringing in more immigrants, but again, it's kind of it's not about being nice to the immigrants, it's about undercutting the labor here. So that's why I say bring in maybe 25,000 people a year. Okay, slow it down, give people a chance to integrate. Now, most of the people that come to Canada right now are coming from the Philippines, Somalia, other African countries, India, and China, and Pakistan. These are the major. And most of it is, most Europeans aren't coming here as much, simply due to the fact that their living conditions are either the same as Canadians or better, for the most part. But however, back in the 1970s, before Trudeau got a hold of it, it was pretty much all European immigration, and then they switched it over for this multiculturalism, idiocy. That's a new word, idiocy. Idiocy, that's a new word for you. I just made that up. I'm King Reg, I can do that. So anyway, that's what happened. So. And they just haven't switched it back. Now, what I'm saying is, I don't like quotas, but you cannot just bring, if you just bring from Pakistan, China, India, and, basically predominantly Muslim countries with the exception of China and some of the Philippines, you really end up with just cultural displacement. You cannot allow ghettos to form in your kind of time here. Okay, you cannot allow ghettos to form in your country. If you do, you will get cultural displacement. That's what Sweden has been dealing with in the past month or so. That's what they're dealing with in most of the European countries, including most noticeably right now France and the UK and Britain, that area, and then of course Norway and Sweden being very noticeable. You got to slow it down. It's, again, shut it off, figure out what you need, bring in only what's necessary, but don't undercut the labor of regular Canadians here. So anyway, do you agree with David Suzuki? Do you not agree with him? Rate, subscribe, share, comment, tell me what you guys think. Okay, so hopefully the flies will hold off enough there. It's nice and quiet, listen. I love that sounding. Yeah. That's the last sound a bad warrior would hear on the battlefield, eh? Yeah. Very cool. So, what have I got going on today? Well, I got a bunch of videos I want to make today. This one, I'm going to start with David Suzuki. Yeah. Years ago when I was a kid, I saw David Suzuki live. And, it was pretty cool. The school sponsored him to come and speak there, and he came and he spoke, and he had his you know, it was a pretty, I got to admit, I enjoyed it, you know. Even, you know, as much as I remember of it, or as little as I remember of it, I do remember one little experiment he showed us, and that was it. And it was kind of neat. It was it was pretty good. And I had a fairly decent opinion of David Suzuki at the time. You know, I used to watch the nature of things growing up and all that, and I thought, okay, well, some of it, yeah, it's really left-wing propaganda. Other stuff, okay, yeah, the man does make a point. I mean, love him or hate him, so to speak, you know, he is kind of one of those people that is, you know, the flies found me, you know, very opinionated, number one, and you got to watch where he gets his source of, you know, his studies, David Suzuki Foundation, all that, where they get their studies and who funds it. That's the big one. But for the most part, I think a lot of the stuff he talks about is fairly neutral. I know this sounds really bizarre, me being as right-wing as I am, actually almost sounding like I'm sticking up for David Suzuki. I'm not. You know, I mean, don't get me wrong. He's a radical. But there is a lot of things that, you know, most of us can agree on, or agree to disagree, or whatever. But a lot that we can agree on.